Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Shadows of Ivory by T.L. Greylock and Bryce O'Connor, narrated by Kate Redding. Part 1. Chapter 1. You know how women are when it comes to pretty things. Technically, I didn't steal it. It was not lost on Esker that these were unlikely to be the best choice of words when faced with a pair of inspectors, the hot-breathed hounds panting at their heels, and the half-dozen grunts wielding various instruments of violence just outside the alley, not to mention the Iron Baron himself, fixing her with a steely glare. No, not lost at all, considering she was, in fact, holding in plain view the very object she was accused of stealing, an object quite dear to the belligerent Baron. Nor was I going to keep it. The inspectors glanced at each other, but it was the Baron's gaze that got under her skin, those condescending eyes, those furiously angled eyebrows, that large chin which was offensive simply for being attached to his face. "It's not worth what you think it is, you know." This was patently false, but Esker never had learned when to keep her mouth shut, despite the numerous attempts made by more than one governess, and she couldn't resist a jab at the Baron's notorious lack of sophistication when it came to his home decor. His face reddening, the Baron plucked the carved ivory and gold box from her hands and dropped it into the waiting arms of his valet, who stared at the ground as though it were the most fascinating thing under the sun. "You're fortunate you carry the name of de Caraval, girl," the Iron Baron growled, forcing the words out through clenched teeth, in a manner that reminded Esker of bones mistakenly placed in a meat grinder. The image pleased her. "What would you do to me, Baron, if I didn't wear Ancini silk and have priceless jewels on my fingers? Cut off my hand? Sell me to the highest bidder? I hear you do quite the trade in such things." The rumour rushed off Esker's tongue as cheerfully as a waterfall leaps off a cliff. The Baron went from red to white in a heartbeat, his cheeks fairly blooming with iciness. If the valet could have melted into the cobblestones, surely he would have. Instead he picked absent-mindedly, or perhaps with subconscious insight, at the ring of golden daggers embroidered on the upper arm of his velvet jacket. "It's dark, girl, and no one knows where you are." The Baron leaned close. Esker smelled the wine on his breath, sweet and sour and cheap. "I could make you disappear." Esker fought the urge to step back, but felt certain her heart was a moment from breaking free from the prison of her rib-cage. "You forget yourself, Baron," she said, hoping she sounded unruffled. The small dagger, hardly more deadly than a letter-opener, strapped to her ankle would be of no use here, though the bone handle seemed to burn against her skin. She nodded over the Baron's shoulder at the inspectors. "These fine gentlemen know exactly where I am. In fact, I'm quite sure they'd be prepared to tell my father, the Vice-Chancelier, exactly how you laid hands on me, how you injured me, how you dragged me off to dispose of me." The inspectors kept their faces still, well-schooled in such things, and Esker wondered how much the Baron had paid them. The hounds stared up at Esker with dark eyes, panting steadily, every muscle taut beneath their smooth coats, their teeth white in the moonlight. Then the taller of the inspectors broke the silence, his words bringing Esker more relief than she cared to admit. "I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding, Baron." The inspector smiled thinly at Esker. "You know how women are when it comes to pretty things." He gestured to the ivory, glistening in the moonlight as it disappeared into the valet's satchel. "You have your property back. I think it's time we all go home." The notion that Esker was like a crow when confronted with a shiny object irked her as much as the Baron's chin, but for once she held her tongue. Madame Mantua might have died of shock to see it. The inspectors broke their shoulder-to-shoulder blockade, opening a path for her to leave the alley. Esker leaned over and patted the young valet on the shoulder. "The de Caraval household is always in search of good people," she said. Without a glance at the Baron, Esker swept past the inspectors, trying not to shy away from the hounds, who sniffed her with more interest than she'd like. "We don't bite," she called over her shoulder. "And I'm quite certain my father would never send you on such a ridiculous task in the middle of the night. And as you can see, I run my own midnight errands." Despite the words of the inspector, the men outside the entrance to the alley did little to allow Esker easy passage. She managed to traverse the obstacle course comprised of their large-booted feet, broad shoulders, and stout clubs without incident. But it wasn't until she had put several wide avenues between her and the Baron that she felt capable of slowing her pace. She crossed the expanse of the decadronum, the clacking of the heels on her boots horribly loud on the white stone as she followed the line of sentinel columns across the 10-sided plaza, and only then, sinking into the familiar shadows of the Laudicans' portico, did she allow herself to relax and breathe deeply. The eerie water chimes at the far end of the decadronum sounded the second song of the morning as Esker took a moment to wait for her heartbeat to return to normal. As the song faded, sending a shiver down her spine, she pressed the concealed release that unlocked one of the library's tall wooden doors and slipped into the dim interior. Cursing her shoes once more, she crossed the marble entryway, the unfortunate clackety-clack ringing after her, and entered one of the grand reading rooms, the empty desks lined up like a flock of sleeping swans. Esker threaded her way to the rear of the reading room and pressed another hidden lever, this one disguised as the big toe on a statue of a man clothed in nothing but a sweeping cape, and gesturing dramatically, with equally dramatic muscles, toward an unseen horizon. Nothing happened. The bronze-studded door in front of her, which ought to have opened to reveal a passageway restricted to staff at the Laudican, and therefore the sort of door Esker should not know how to open, remained steadfastly shut. "Really?" Esker cast a withering gaze up at the blank eyes of the statue. "Now is hardly the time, Lindronicus." The statue made no reply, and Esker bent over to fiddle with the long-dead conqueror's toe. It was known to stick, a faulty mechanism, the staff claimed. Esker was inclined to believe the door's creator had deliberately made the latch tricky and susceptible to damp. If half the stories about the library's first and greatest patron, who also happened to be its designer and architect, were true, Esker would expect the statue's toe to crumble to dust at some predetermined future date, rendering the passageway useless. It was the kind of joke she was sure Giovanespi de Varotto would enjoy. "Perhaps," Esker muttered, as she wiggled the toe this way and that way, ears straining for the faint click that would signal the alignment had been corrected. "A different appendage would be more appropriate. At least if I yanked it, I ought to get a response." "That's rather vulgar." Esker whirled around, nearly convinced the statue of Lindronicus had finally answered her after years of one-way conversations. But the voice belonged to a slender man who had crossed the reading room far too stealthily, a stack of books pressing up against his chin as he cradled the tomes in his arms. Esker sighed and pushed a strand of hair out of her face. "You are far too quiet for my own good." "Yes, you've made me aware of that," the young man said. "Unfortunately, I have yet to discover my stampeding abilities." Esker rolled her eyes. "I should fit you with an obnoxious bell like a goat. Whenever you enter a room it would warn the occupants that an insufferable know-it-all is in their midst. Good thing this know-it-all also happens to know that you need to be gentler with that toe. You'll never find the right spot if you bash it around like that." Esker laughed. What woman hasn't had to tell a man that at least once? Blushing furiously, much to Esker's delight, the young man brushed past her, left his books on a desk, and with a well-practised flick of a finger, set the lever in place. The door swung open. "Don't smirk, Albus." "I never smirk." The young man performed the tiniest of bows before scooping the stack of books up once more. "After you, my Lady de Caraval." "That was the best you could manage? Technically, I didn't steal it? I've come to expect so much more from you, Esker." The library employee never looked up from the pages he was bent over, his gaze intent on the intricate ancient script he insisted he could read. "This is where you choose to interject. Not when I related my fear of being confronted by the Iron Baron and a host of lowlifes. A gentleman would inquire after my safety and ascertain if I was unharmed. You know the stories about Tybalt de Venescu?" Esker stopped pacing the length of the work-table where Albus sat. Her fierce frown, however, was lost on the librarian, who still had eyes only for his book. "You've had your share of risky adventures," Albus said mildly. "You should take my lack of concern as a compliment on your abilities." "Yes, well, that may be, but you might reconsider your assumption of my safety if you knew what was in my possession." Esker planted her hands on her hips, certain her dramatic air would at last draw Albus away from his text. The librarian seemed not to have heard. "Albus." "Don't you want to know what I have?" "I dare say you're going to tell me, regardless of what I might desire." "By all the dead librarians, Albus, you really are horrible. Now get your nose out of that book and look at me." Smiling faintly, the librarian lifted his gaze at last, but the humour vanished the moment he saw what lay in Esker's palm. Albus lurched to his feet, the book forgotten, his hands hovering over the pages. "What is that?" "I should very much like you to tell me. I don't suppose you happen to know what a long-dead queen stashed in a box that has been lost for centuries and no one knows how to open?" "Then you did steal something." The librarian seemed torn between rushing to examine the object Esker held and maintaining his composure. "I must insist that technically I did not. The box containing it was handed to me by a source I shall keep nameless." "But you removed it from the box." Esker shrugged, though the thrill of the moment in which she had discovered the box's secret sent her stomach tumbling over itself still, as though she were racing across the rooftop once again, voices careening after her, the ivory reliquary spilling from her grasp to land in a shard of moonlight. She took a steadying breath. "Someone had to." "And the Baron?" "I think he has no idea what, if anything, was in his precious box. To him the ivory reliquary is merely a priceless relic of the Alescu dynasty. If he knew how to open it, he would have done so in my presence to ascertain the contents were safe." At last Albus's gaze fixed on Esker, his face grave. "That was a risk. If he had opened it—" The memory of that moment and the terror she had felt tightened like skewers into Esker's temples. "But he didn't." She swallowed hard, and was glad that at last Albus could see what the evening almost cost her. Their gazes remained locked for a long moment, the librarian's brown eyes full of concern. "May I?" he asked at last. Without a word, Esker extended her hand. Albus drifted silently around the corner of the long table. His fingers hesitated over Esker's palm as he took in the disc and the pattern of markings, thin lines of varying lengths and direction, interrupted here and there by dots and empty spaces carved into the metal and stained black. And then, hesitation replaced by scholarly purpose, He plucked the disc up by its edge. "No, not like that," Esker said, but it was too late. The disc, strangely malleable despite the appearance of bronze, crumpled, folding in on itself like a threatened hedgehog, until it resembled a large and rather lumpy 20-sided die. The librarian stared at it in confusion and surprise. Esker couldn't resist a grin. "Now you've done it." "How did you know?" "Well, when one is in a hurry and trying to steal something, one is not often very precise about where one places one's fingers." Albus frowned and looked Esker up and down. "How on earth did you transport it and keep it flat?" "Wouldn't you like to know? And wouldn't you like me to tell you how to restore it?" "It's unbecoming to gloat, Esker." "I never gloat." It was Albus's turn to roll his eyes, but so great was his impatience that he handed the strange object back to Esker without another word, and then proceeded to screech in horror as she placed it on the floor and brought the heel of her boot down onto it as hard as she could. "I can hardly believe that's the proper method," Albus said, aghast. "You are undoubtedly correct. But it worked, didn't it?" Indeed, the disc was once more a disc, gleaming up at them from the wooden floorboards. "I don't think I want to know how you discovered that." "In a fit of anger, naturally." "And fear." Albus sighed. "Naturally." "I'm sure you were going to attempt to coax it back with some clever rhyme spoken in 16 languages. "Nonsense. Metal doesn't understand language, Esker." And yet the librarian, for all his seriousness, couldn't suppress the smile forming on his lips. "Though that would be a beautiful thing to see. You trying to sing to it in ancient Azarian." "Ancient Azarian has no vowels," Esker said, eyes narrowing. The smile grew. "Precisely." Albus turned his attention back to the disc, frowned, then grabbed a shapeless chunk of grey rock from a shelf and knelt on the floor. As he held the rock over the disc, it leapt from the floor and clung to the grey stone. Looking up at Esker expectantly, he made a little shooing motion with his free hand. "Go on. You know I can't work with you hovering over me." "Don't shoo me, Albus. But don't you need to go home? Sleep? The water chimes must be moments away from sounding the third song of the morning." "Home?" The librarian got to his feet. "Don't lecture me. I get far more done when the library is quiet. Why on earth would I waste that time?" "I'd hardly call socializing, eating and sleeping a waste of time, but," Esker said, holding out her hands to express her surrender as the librarian began to argue, "I know you'll never appreciate the charms of sunlight and friends that aren't books. But I want to watch you work. I want to be here. I'll be quiet, promise. As still as a sail on a windless day. You'll never even know I'm still here." "We both know you can't sit still for longer than it takes you to invent some harebrained idea and insist you go galloping after it." Albus ignored Esker's scowl and looked nonchalantly at the disc, still dangling from the rock in his hand. "Besides, are you not due in court at an early hour?" Esker gasped, her stomach plummeting through the floorboards. "I'd hate to see you lose the Bourdillon-Levesque contract, all because you can't keep track of time." Esker rushed to Albus and planted a kiss on his cheek. Hastening to the door and the network of restricted passageways beyond, she called over her shoulder, "I hate you and love you, Albus Courtney." "Likewise, my lady." Chapter 2. Do you enjoy sea bathing, Your Honour? As you can see, Your Honour, in paragraph 5 of section 273 of Amendment 16, the man in black paused, frowned, and cleared his throat for what Esker was sure was the 273rd time that morning. Forgive me, Your Honour, I misspoke. It is paragraph 6, not 5, of section 273, line 12. Just there. The man jabbed a long finger at the parchment in his hand. The justice, seated on high in front of Esker and the lawyer, blinked back at him. "I shall read it for you," the man in black said. He cleared his throat once more, and Esker tried to shift imperceptibly on her tall, narrow chair. In vain. Her behind was most certainly going numb. "The rights of the aforementioned property holder, henceforth known as—" Esker, feeling like her eyelids were being dragged down by the weight of Albus's heaviest books, could not tear her gaze away from the careful ringlets of hair cascading down the justice's shoulders, keeping herself awake by imagining him seated before a vanity, rolling each ringlet before tucking them all beneath a lacy, no, silk, surely, nightcap. Even the slightest movement, a heavier breath, a tilted shoulder, sent the tight curls shuddering. It was mesmerizing. She would die before admitting it to Albus, but her late night was wearing on her, and she was in danger of taking a nap in court. "Held in perpetuity according to the will and testament of the deceased." A fly buzzed in front of Esker's face, and she went slightly cross-eyed for a moment before it flew onward, coming to rest on the justice's lace-trimmed sleeve. She watched it march its way up the velvet landscape before coming to rest near the closest tangle of ringlets, no doubt eyeing the massive obstacle looming in its path with fear and doubt. Or perhaps gumption and reckless resolve. Esker really couldn't say. Regardless, the fly, either brave, suicidal, or very dim, sallied forth, entering into the vast morass of brown curls. "As stated in Statute 10 of the Varadian Compromise." Esker wondered if the fly was finding crumbs, a bit of pastry from the justice's morning meal, or better yet, fruit filling. Unless, of course, whatever the fly was hunting was a cruel ruse, a clever trap. The poor creature, lured in by irresistible odours and the promise of a rare feast, only to seek and find nothing but waxy pomade, scented with strawberries and figs. Then again, Esker supposed it was possible a fly could eat pomade. She would have to ask Albus. "Lady de Caravel?" Esker flinched, suddenly aware that the justice's gaze and that of the man in black had shifted to her. She had the sinking feeling they had been waiting some time. She stood, trying not to wince at the numb sensation in her backside. "Is it my turn already? How the time flies," Esker said, smiling pleasantly. She wondered if the insect had buzzed in the justice's ear yet. She turned to the man in black. "Your arguments are most compelling, sir, and I compliment you on the case you have made." The faintest of blushes marred the lawyer's stern countenance as Esker turned her attention to the justice. "Do you enjoy sea-bathing, Your Honour?" The justice frowned. "A frivolous pastime." A lie. Esker had it on good authority that the Honourable Justice had spent each of his last 6 holidays discreetly ensconced in a villa at the seaside, hosting all manner of guests, savoury and unsavoury, invited and compelled, for all manner of debauched activities. No matter. She hadn't expected him to admit to it. She also had it on good authority that he had bribed, threatened, and murdered his way into possession of that coveted villa. And if he had done all that for a bit of sand and sun, well, Esker could only imagine what he might have done to ensure his miraculous election to yet another term, an astonishing 4 terms in all, as a member of the esteemed Court Beneath the Sun. Esker smiled again. "My mistake. You look like a man who enjoys the fine things the seaside has to offer. Seaweed wraps." Esker kept smiling. "Sand baths." She paused. "Pearl diving." The justice went pale, the ringlets quivering. And who could forget the cuisine? The eels are so— Esker hesitated once more. Ravishing. The justice nearly bolted out of his seat. "The contract, Lady de Caravel," he managed to say. "What have you to say about it?" To Esker's relief, the man in black had his nose stuck in a thick sheaf of papers and was oblivious to the justice's consternation. Esker gave a wave of her hand and assumed a brisk tone. "Only that the site in question must be excavated, or we risk losing it forever as the riverbed continues to alter and the banks cave in. There is no one more equipped to manage the situation. While I am sensitive to the concerns of my colleague's client," she said, nodding to the man in black, "the site is of such importance that we must abandon protocol and precedent and learn what we can before it is too late. It is vital to our understanding of the world and all future archaeological endeavours— this was perhaps something of an exaggeration— that we undertake this project with the utmost haste and care." Esker drew in a breath, prepared to continue. "Enough!" The justice got to his feet, his face still pale, his hands clasped tight behind his back. "I have reached a decision." He took a deep breath. The fly emerged and circled the justice's head. Esker swallowed a smile. The man in black cleared his throat and stood up straighter, chest puffed against the buttons of his stiff jacket, no doubt prepared to enjoy his moment of victory over the presumptions of Lady de Caravel, who had not even had the sense to bring a trained lawyer to argue her case. "In the matter of the Bourdillon-l'Evêque contract, I find in favour of Lady de Caravel. All rights, duties, financial gain or loss associated therein are now the sole responsibility of Lady de Caravel and the Forenzia Company. The court beneath the sun washes its hands of this matter once and for all." The man in black gaped. Esker reached over, hand extended. "Well argued, my friend. My condolences. It's truly a surprise," she murmured. The man, his eyes glazing over as he grasped her fingers weakly, let forth a strangled noise that would no doubt have been a lovely compliment if only he weren't choking on his disbelief. Esker gave his fingers a firm shake, withdrew, and approached the justice, prepared to offer him the same meaningless pleasantries. "Your Honour," she began, but the justice cut her off. "I trust you are satisfied." His voice was tight and low, his brows knitted together in a deep frown. Esker smiled. "But of course, Your Honour. Delighted, in fact." "Then we'll hear nothing more of pearl diving? Nor the eels?" "Whatever are you speaking of, Your Honour? You yourself said you avoid the seaside." The justice rose up on his toes ever so slightly, his heels clicking as they came back down to the polished floor in an attempt to regain his composure. "Just so. Exactly." "But if you were to change your mind," Esker went on, as though heedless of the vein pulsing in the justice's temple and the crimson creeping into his cheeks. "My father knows a thing or two about property. I'm sure he'd be happy to advise you in your purchase." "Good day, Lady de Caravel," the justice interrupted. Nodding stiffly, he spun away from her, his curls bouncing in retreat. As the double doors swung open to release him, a serving girl slipped through. She clutched Esker's belongings tight and dipped a curtsy. "Your cape, my lady." Esker smiled at the girl and dropped the cape over her shoulders, its slick fabric still speckled with the rain that had burst from the overcast sky on her way to the court beneath the sun. "And the trunk?" Another curtsy. "Waiting, as you asked, my lady." "Very good. Tell the driver he may proceed, and that I'll follow shortly. The transport will be waiting at the company wharf. He'll know what to do." The girl nodded and ran off. "A vulture you are," the man in black said, staring after the girl. As he turned his gaze to her, Eska could see his brain working out the fact that she had...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?